Alright, I hope you guys are doing well. Here we are, right? The fire is going, right? It's nice and toasty in here, right? I got a new Yeti for my birthday, right? It's just I don't know, it's a smaller version of the one I had. I gotta be honest, I'm into these things, right? I'm all about the Yetis. I got the cooler now, I got the Rambler. What's not to love? What's not to love in life? So I should probably turn some lights on. So hold on, let me do that. All right, is that a little bit? That should be a little better. I didn't like that I had you could see shadows on my face, so it made me look scary. I don't want to look scary for you guys. So let's go ahead and start picking up where we left off from before we went for the weekend. All right, so if you remember, the last time we looked, David had showed concern for the ark, right, in section 66, right? And as a result of it, we said that God was going to bless David by having the Messiah come from his line, as well as ensuring David's line will last forever, and that his son Solomon will build the temple. So those were the three promises that we looked at. If you turn to page 184 in your textbook, we need to just spend a little bit of time here talking about the Psalms. All right. So if you look down at the very bottom, right, in the right-hand corner, it talks about the Psalms. So first and foremost, right, there are 150 Psalms in the Bible, right? There's an entire book called the Book of Psalms, and there are 150 of them. The reason why we put this section here on the Psalms right here is because King David, is believed to have written most of these Psalms, right? So most of the authorship is attributed to David, right? Now, if you click above, right, and you look at that scrolling sidebar, it talks about how there are 5 different types of Psalms, right? And these really correlate to the 5 different types of prayers, right? Because a Psalm is really just a song, right? It's almost like poetry, biblical poetry, so to speak. So the first type of psalm is this psalm of praise and thanksgiving, all right, where we offer praise to God. We tell God how awesome He is, and then we also thank Him for the many things that we already have in our life. And I think that one always, that type of prayer always gets, kind of skipped by a lot of us. That we don't really thank God for what we have. We're very good at the petitionary prayer where we tell God what we want, but we don't often thank God for what He's given us already. The second type of psalm, right, is the psalm of lament or petition, right? This is a psalm where, like, my life's not going well, I'm kind of sad, and I need something, and so I'm going to ask God for something in return, right? So that's the psalm of lament and petition. The third one is the psalm of wisdom, okay, which gives us little insights in order to tell us how to live according to God's laws and God's ways. The fourth is liturgical or worship psalms. These are songs that would have been used by the ancient Jewish people for the worship of God and for the liturgical feasts that they would have had, offering sacrifices, that kind of stuff. And then the last one is a historical psalm, which is really just talks about all the wonderful things that God has done throughout history, right? Basically taking a story and then turning it into a song, right? So those are the 5 types of Psalms that we have for you. And I would really just like to take a look together at Psalm 22 for you. So if you turn the page to page 185, we're going to look here at this Psalm 22. Right now, this isn't the Psalm of petition. Right, the reason why I want to focus on this Psalm is because this is the Psalm that Jesus prays while He's dying on the cross. Right. So if you remember, Jesus is hanging on the cross. Right, and while He's hanging on the cross, He's going to say, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Or sometimes translated as, "Why have you abandoned me?" Right? And if you look at Psalm 22 on page 185, the very first line of that psalm is, my God, why have you abandoned me?" All right? And so what Jesus was doing is He was calling to mind this psalm, right? Because this is remarkable. Back when Jesus was alive, people didn't know how to read and write like they do today. Right? So a good Jewish man, or a good Jew in general, would have had the Psalms memorized by the first line. So when Jesus said, my God, why have you abandoned me?" that would have triggered in the minds of all of the Jewish people that are watching Jesus be crucified to say the Psalm in their head. All right? And what I wanted to point out to you is that this psalm, right, is remarkable because it is pointing to Jesus' death on the cross. Right, so while Jesus is hanging on the cross, he is telling the people that are watching him, hey, this was foretold in Psalm 22. Now that's pretty legit. That's pretty legit. So notice some of the things that this psalm says. So we're going to look at verse 7. Jesus says, I am a worm, not a man, scorned by men, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They curl their lips and jeer. They shake their heads at me. He relied on the Lord. Let him deliver him. Right? That's exactly what the Jewish leaders say to Jesus while he's hanging there. Right? Jesus on the cross, people come by and they yell at him, they mock him. Right? The Jewish leaders are like, oh, you relied on God? Well, have God take yourself down from the cross then, if you are who you say you are. All right? Go down to verse 14. They open their mouths against me, they rend and roar. Like water, my life drains away. All my bones are disjointed. Right? Like life, right? Was it like water? My life drains away. Like he's been beaten. He's hanging there. He's crucified, and his life is draining out of his body as he slowly kind of bleeds out from all these injuries. Right? My bones are all disjointed. Right? In order to crucify, a lot of times their shoulder would have become dislocated. And from carrying that weight of the heavy cross, it's most likely that Jesus' bones were very disjointed. Verse 16, as dry as a potsherd is my throat, my tongue cleaves to my palate. You lay me in the dust. Right? Jesus says on the cross, I thirst. I thirst. Right? He is dehydrated. He's suffering. Verse 17, dogs surround me. A pack of evildoers close in on me. Right? So once again, right, you see the Roman soldiers that are circling around him. Now, if this next line doesn't really ring some bells for you, look at this. They have pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. Right? They stare at me and gloat. They divide my garments among them. For my clothing they cast lots. They pierced my hands and my feet. I mean, does it get any more obvious than that? Jesus is crucified. He's nailed to the cross. Right? Everybody can see him. His bones are there for everyone to watch because he's so just dehydrated from the moment. And also they cast lots for my clothing. It's exactly what the soldiers do while he's hanging there. Right? So that's the first half of the psalm. But I love the psalm because the psalm goes on to praise God. All right? It goes on. I will offer praise in the great assembly in verse 26. My vows I will fulfill before those who fear him. Right? All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. Right? So Jesus is speaking here in this moment about this unbelievable suffering, and then the end of the psalm ends with a song of praise. That no matter what I'm going through, I will praise the Lord. What a beautiful motto for us to live by. All right, you can see a couple other psalms there, right? Psalm 23 is the Lord is my shepherd psalm there. That is a very famous psalm. All right, so you can kind of take a look at those. All right, any questions? I'm going to poke the fire. All right, because it's always good to have extra flame, people. It's all about the flame. All right, you need the flame. All right, so turn to section 67 here, everybody. 67. All right, so this is the story here. Right? David is good, but everybody's got a fault, right? Nobody's perfect, and this is David's slip up, so to speak, and he's going to slip up in a big way here. So this is like some, Meet the Kardashians type of Jersey Shore type of Bachelorette type nonsense that's about to happen here in section 67. So let's take a look at this, right? It says, at the turn of the year, we're looking at verse 11, chapter 1. At the turn of the year, the time when kings go to war, David sent out Joab along with his officers and all Israel, and they laid waste the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. David himself remained in Jerusalem. Highlight that. Highlight, David himself remained in Jerusalem. And I want you to put this note, right, that David should be at war. Notice, it says, at the time of the year when kings go to war, what's David doing? He's back at the palace, right? Right? I have a note for you, right, to put here. The notes are all in Schoology for you to take a look at. Right, but it says, David should be at war, as was the custom of the kings, but he has stayed because he has become complacent and a little bit arrogant. Right? David is understanding success. He's like, oh man, it is good to be the king. I don't need to go to war. I'll have somebody else fight my battles. So he stays back. One evening, David rose from his bed and strolled about on the roof of the king's house. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. She was very beautiful. Right? Remember this phrase. The idle mind is the devil's playground. Right? Think about that again. The idle mind is the devil's playground. When you are doing nothing, when you're bored, when you've got nothing else to do, that's usually when you get yourself into trouble. Right? You think about those times with your friends where you get yourself into trouble. It usually comes from you sitting around and be like, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? Oh, I got an idea. Let's do this. And then you go and do something stupid. The idle mind, when you're bored, when you have nothing else to do, that's when temptation works its best work. Right? So David should be at war, but he's not. He's back in the palace. So he sees this woman. Verse 3, David sent people to inquire about the woman who was told she is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam and wife of Uriah the Hittite, Joab's armor bearer. Then David sent messengers and took her. When she came to him, he took her to bed at a time when she was just purified after her period, and she returned to her house. But the woman had become pregnant. She sent a message to David to inform him, I am pregnant. Come on, man. So you guys picked up on that? David sees this woman, right? He is going to reach out in lust towards her. He's going to have her come to his palace. He sleeps with her. She becomes pregnant. What's the big problem? She's married. Right? She's married to one of the soldiers that is fighting in the war where David should be. So what should David do? He should come clean. He should apologize. But he's the king, so why would he do that? He's going to try to cover it up. Verse 6. So David sent the message to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. So just highlight Uriah the Hittite so we all know that. And just write down Bathsheba's husband. Right? That's the guy's name, Uriah the Hittite. All right? So Joab sent Uriah to David. And when he came, David asked him how Joab was, how the army was, and how the war was going. And Uriah answered that all was well. Verse 8, David said to Uriah, go down to your house and bathe your feet. That seems awkward. Right? Now, believe it or not, this is a euphemism in biblical language for go home to your house and sleep with your wife. That's David's plan. I know how to do. I'll bring Uriah back from war. Uriah will go home. He'll be so happy that he's home from war. He'll sleep with his wife. 9 months later, they'll have a baby. We'll just pretend like it's his. That's David's plan. Sounds messed up? Yeah, because it is. All right? But what happens? Uriah leaves the king's house, and a portion from the king's table was sent after him, meaning David's going to send him back with all these gifts. But Uriah is going to sleep at the entrance of the king's house, where the other officer of his lord did not go down to his own house. Right? So Uriah's like, I'm not going there. So in the morning, David is going to say to Uriah, how come you don't go home and bathe your feet? And Uriah is going to say to David, how can I go home and enjoy myself and eat and drink with my wife while my countrymen are off at battle? Right? So Uriah is a good guy. Right? Uriah is loyal to David. This is making this whole situation even worse. Right? Uriah is loyal to David. All right? And so in verse 12, David says to Uriah, all right, no problem. Why don't you stay here another day? And so David is going to throw this big feast for Uriah, and he's going to get Uriah drunk, thinking that he'll let his inhibitions down and his decision-making down, and then he'll get up and he'll go home and he'll bathe his feet with his wife. That's the plan. So that night, David gets him drunk, and verse 13, right, Uriah goes and sleeps in the guard's house with the other soldiers, doesn't go home. So now David's like, all right, I'm going to take it to the next level. Verse 15, he's going to send Uriah back to battle with a letter to Joab. Joab is the commander of the army. And he's going to say to Joab, this is what you are to do. Place Uriah up front where the fighting is fierce, then pull back and leave him to be struck down dead. Ouch. Right? So he wants Uriah to put, David wants Joab, I'm going crazy here. David wants Joab to put Uriah in the middle of the battle have them fight and then pull everybody else back so that Uriah will be killed in the battle. Now that Uriah is dead, his wife Bathsheba will be free to marry, he'll be able to marry her, and he'll be able to cover up the baby, right, the adultery. So that's exactly what happens, verse 17. When the men of the city made a sortie against Joab, some officers of David's army fell, and Uriah the Hittite also died. Notice verse 17. With this one fine swoop, David is now an adulterous murderer. He committed adultery with Bathsheba, and now he is killing Uriah, her husband, to cover it up. Come on, David. Right? Like, man, sometimes I think, like, God, you know how to pick them. Right? Like, some of these people in the Bible, we're looking at it like, man, what brokenness. What brokenness. All right? So, what happens, right? The word is sent that Uriah was killed. Verse 27 on the next page, you can just highlight this. She became his wife and bore him a son. But on the side of the Lord, what David had done was evil. Absolutely. David will now marry Bathsheba now that Uriah is dead. Let that sink in for a moment. That's how David is going to cover this whole thing up. Right? He's going to commit adultery, and then he kills off her husband so that he can hide the fact that he committed adultery. Messed up. So this is when Nathan shows up. Now, if you guys remember, Nathan is the prophet that is going to speak to David, right? It's his job to go to the king and say, you have messed up. This is what God says. So what Nathan does is brilliant, right? Because there's two ways you can kind of let somebody be aware of their sin. You can either walk up to them and say, hey, this is what you did and it's wrong. Or you can make them realize that something is wrong on their own. And that's what Nathan's going to do. Nathan's going to walk up to them, and in verse 1 of chapter 12, he's going to say to David, look, I need you to help me judge this case, because something like this just happened in your kingdom. And he says to her in verse 2, in a certain town there were two men, one rich, one poor. The rich man had flocks and herds in great numbers, but the poor man had nothing at all except one little ewe lamb that he bought. He nourished her, and she grew up with him and his children. Of what little he had, she ate. From his own cup she drank. In his bosom she slept. She was like a daughter to him. Right? So there's a rich man and a poor man. The poor man, all he has in his life is his little baby lamb. And he loves his little baby lamb, and he takes care of the baby lamb, and he feeds the baby lamb, and he sleeps in his house, and his kids live the lamb. It's like his pet. All right? Verse 4, now a visitor came to the rich man. And rather than going out to his own flocks and herds to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to comfort him, he took the poor man's baby lamb, the ewe lamb, and prepared it for the one who had come to him. Right? So this rich man, rather than taking from the multitude of what he has already, he goes over to this poor man's house and takes that little baby lamb that he thought was a pet, kills it, serves it to his guests. Right? And Nathan's like, what should we do to the rich man? And David is going to say in verse 5, he grew very angry with that man and said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves death. He shall make fourfold restitution for the lamb because he has done this and was unsparing. Then verse 7, this is harsh. Nathan looks at him and says, you're that guy. You're that man. You're the rich man. You had everything you've ever wanted. And you went over to Uriah's house and you took his wife and then you killed him to cover it up. You're that guy. Whoa. Now that is how you make somebody realize that they did something was wrong. All right? And so as a result of this, God's going to bring about 3 punishments on David's household. Right? 3 punishments. All right, number 11. Verse 11. Thus says the Lord, I will bring evil upon you out of your own house. So that's punishment number 1. David's own family is going to act with evil towards itself. And we're not going to read it, but if you want to read through the scriptures, right, the second book of Kings, right, it's going to get to the point, right, where David is going to have multiple wives, right, and his sons, right, both from different wives, but like one half son is going to rape his half sister, and then in order to cover it up, the other one like goes and kills him, right? It's just bad. It's just evil, just pure evil. Right, of what's going to happen. David's going to watch how his own house is going to be ripped apart with this evil. That's punishment number 1. Punishment number 2, right, that your wives are going to become adulterous in broad daylight. Right, that your wives are not going to be faithful to you. You're going to be the laughing stock of Israel. because your wives will not be faithful. All right? That's punishment number 2. And punishment number 3, right, is that the child of David and Bathsheba is going to die. This child that was conceived through this adulterous act is not going to survive. All right? But notice verse 13, and this is what makes David so great, everybody. David is going to immediately, as soon as Nathan points out his sin, David doesn't fight it, and he's not like, no, wait, that's ridiculous, God, how dare you. He says in verse 13, I have sinned against the Lord. And he's going to admit it. That's what makes David so great. And David, and God, of course, is going to forgive David's sin. However, there are still repercussions. There are still repercussions. Right? I think we learned that in our own life. All right? So David's son with Bathsheba, this firstborn son, is going to pass away, just like Nathan had said. But Bathsheba will have a second son. His name is Solomon. You can go and highlight him. He's over on the right-hand column, page 189. Solomon is the second child of David and Bathsheba, and he's going to become the king after Bathsheba dies, right? So when David is basically going to promise Bathsheba, because of all of her suffering, losing her husband, losing her firstborn son, that her son, their next son, Solomon, will become king. That's how he gets the throne. All right? So once again, to highlight, this is a huge fault of David. I am not in any way letting him off the hook here. But what makes David such a great ruler, such a great king, is not that he's perfect. It's that he recognizes when he's not perfect and asks for forgiveness, right? My son had his first confession this past weekend, right? And I just basically said to him, like, dude, the Christian life is not about, being perfect. It's more about recognizing that we're not perfect and asking God for forgiveness. All right? So that's what we have for class here today. Right? I hope you guys enjoyed that. We'll do section 68 tomorrow. And then we'll talk again in the conference here. All right? So have a great night, and I'll see you later. Moran out. Mr. Moran. That's who I am.